Good afternoon, everyone. I am Porinita, and I welcome you all to InspireOne's first of the three series webinar on building leadership capital, identifying your high potentials and creating development goals. Research done over time by IBM suggests that 30 to 40% of an organization's market capitalization is driven by its leaders. Organizations therefore invest heavily on developing its leadership bench strength. Based on the Pareto principle, studies have long suggested that investing in the right people maximizes organizational returns. Given the business impact a high potential leader has, it is critical for every organization to identify its high potential and build its human capital by establishing clear development goals aligned to the organizational objectives and individuals' aspirations. This, in turn, ensures organizational success. In today's webinar, our key focus will be on how to identify high potentials and ensuring people are clear about their development goals. Any leadership development process begins by assessing the talent of an organization. Second is charting out the development plan. And thirdly is creating a development journey for them to realize their true potential to take on future roles. Today, in our webinar, we will be focusing on the first section, and our subsequent webinars will be focusing on the other two sections. Before we proceed, let me take a moment to introduce you to a few things. In order to make this webinar a co-learning and sharing opportunity, you can use the text chat feature at all points during the webinar. For minimal disturbance during the course of the webinar, we will request you to keep your lines on mute. We encourage you to send your questions as you have them. We will try to address as many questions as we can during the webinar. Alternatively, we will get back to you with the answers over email. Today's webinar is brought to you by InspireOne. InspireOne offers leadership and organizational development solutions to inspire business performance by transforming an organization's most valuable asset, the human capital. In the past, InspireOne has supported many businesses during their business transformation through multiple solutions and through many initiatives in the leadership space. Our main speaker for today is Mr. Deepak Mohla, whose experience consists of a dynamic mix in both the corporate and consulting assignments across various industries. He has focused his efforts around organizational behavior and change, top team management, succession planning, and executive coaching. I will be in conversation with him to leverage his rich experience in the area of human capital development. We welcome Mr. Mohla to the webinar and thank you for giving your time to speak with us, sir.
Thank you.
In the current business scenario, continued global economic whirlpools and whirlwinds are forcing organizations to undergo a paradigm shift in the way they function. In Jack Welch's words, an organization's ability to learn and translate the learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage. This has, however, been anticipated in a McKinsey study that not more than 1/3 of the major organizations would be able to survive this whirlwind in the next 25 years to come. This entails the pressing need for organizations to remodel themselves in the 21st century enterprise, what we call the 21st CE and enterprise for tomorrow. It demands of them to foresee market opportunities and constantly invest in the development of talent who can harvest this potential. The digital economy has catapulted talent development into being a critical agenda for corporates across the world. To be able to successfully transition into the 21st CE, companies will need to ensure their people agenda is focused on development of employees who have displayed potential to assume challenges foreseen not in just today's business context, but tomorrow's as well. And the aim is to be future ready. These are the employees who we call the high potential. Sir, my first question to you is, in an organization, we have high potentials definitely who are the drivers of organizational success. And we also have high performers who constantly perform and deliver on time with precision. My question, sir, is if they both are important, if they both are assets and drivers of organizational success, whom should an organization focus on to develop its future leadership pipeline?
Thank you, Porinita, for your kind words to introduce me, and welcome to all the participants to this webinar. It is indeed a very, very interesting subject we are talking of today. of development of high potential leaders or leaders in a company. And typically, it's a process which goes through the identification phase, through agreeing on development goals, agreeing on a development path, going through the development path, working on long-term projects to be able to go through that actual experience of learning before one says one has been able to reach some milestone of development. And today, as I understand from you, we are focusing more on how do we identify these high potentials, high performers, and how do we ensure that we come to a common goal. When we say we, I'm talking of the organization and the high performers or the high potentials. And it's critical that they are both aligned to the same goal. But I now come to your question that how do you determine high potentials from high performers, and whether the company is right to invest in both, or should we make choices, and what kind of choices should they be? So let me start with the first question of what is a high performer and what is a high potential. I'm sure most of the learned participants would already be aware of it, but I think sometimes organizations do make mistakes in this. For example, organizations are very chary sometimes of talking about their people with high potential, lest people who are left out feel that we don't have a future. And I think that's a very timid way which management sometimes approach an issue of identifying your high potential. So in a way, Parinita, what it means is that you have identified your high potential, but you want to keep them masked. And if you keep them masked, then how are you going to ensure they are developed? How are you going to ensure that they are models for the others to follow on? That's one part of it. As far as high performers are concerned, I think everyone in an organization knows that these are the high performers. Why? Because they continue to get recognition, they continue to get promotions, they continue to get the best increments. And typically, they are known across the organization, these are high performers. Question is, are they also people with high potential? And that's what brings me to your question. A high performer is performing for today. Does he have the potential to perform for tomorrow with the same vigor, the same output as he is doing today? If he has that potential, then he's a high performer and a high potential, both. But let's take another situation where a person may not be a very high performer, but he may have a very high potential. Now, just because we are linking and focusing only on the high performers, sometimes in that high fluorescence focus on the high performers, we miss out the high potentials. And we don't see that there is a strong potential which is existing there. And many companies tend to misconstrue high performance with high potential. Now, when you are on the expressway of development or corporate life, you have people who are the high performers who go. But after some time, you may find them tapering off because they have reached a level beyond which they are finding it difficult to sustain the same tempo. And suddenly management starts wondering, hey, this guy was doing extremely well till yesterday. What happened to him? What happened to him was he was a high performer, but today he may not be at the same level of high performance. And if we do not focus on him, then he could get off the treadmill or the expressway of development and move into a mid performer before he becomes a low performer. So one challenge which organizations have is, how do we continue to have this person as a high performer, even if he does not have a high potential? Because these people are worth their weight in gold for ongoing performance. On the other hand, there are people with high potential who may or may not be high performers, as I mentioned. How do you spot them? How do you identify them? Is one of the big challenges which managements face. There are many cases which I come across working with industry, where a person who was not a very high performer has over time become their star performer, right? And I think it's very important for leadership, a good leader, a good coach, to be able to identify such people and take them out from the crowd, as it were, into the limelight of development and high potential. So you need high performers for today's performance. Definitely, without those high performers, organizations will not be able to sustain high performance as a company. And you need high potential to ensure that your performance continues to be high in the future. These are people who will take you off the beaten path. They will take you into different areas. They will challenge the status quo. And they are the ones who probably could be the disruptors, which will give you the future growth. So you need to focus on both. I don't think that the choice is for management to say, I will focus on the high performers and not the high potential, or I'll focus on the high potential and not the high performers. So you want to take care of today, you also want to take care of tomorrow. The approach for the two could be very different, right? And that I think we will discuss as we go along.
So it is easy to spot the high performers of today. And if the high performers continue to be the high potential, I think the development journey becomes easier for management to identify and take forward. How about the people who are not the high performers today, but there is a potential of, being the drivers tomorrow? So how do you identify them? You mentioned about talent spotters, but in an organizational context, in the context of the organizational values and the leadership capabilities that you might need tomorrow, how would you identify those people? What special qualities as a management who is sitting on the chair, what is his responsibility? How do he go about tracing those people?
I think it's an interesting question because typically, if I'm a manager and I have to see the performance of my team members, I would say anyone who's a high performer, how can I say he's not a high potential? At the same time, there's a medium performer, but I believe he has a high potential. How do I put forward his case? How do I justify that? And so most managers tend to take the path of least resistance. And you will find that people with high performers gradually keep on moving up till they reach a level of what they say incompetence. And that's when you say, okay, now these people are no good. And that's why the role of a manager and a leader becomes extremely critical in being able to spot the capability. So typically in a performance management system, when you go through it, you find most organizations and most managers first evaluate the performance because it's very clear and possible to do so. But when it comes to looking at the potential, and various organizations have different ways of measuring it, they look at the leadership behaviors, the values, the consistency of performance, the capability the person brings into many other areas. Those take a bit of a back seat, and the performance tends to cloud my judgment as a manager in identifying the high potential. So I think it's very important for firstly the managers to be educated and trained and coached on how to spot those high performers from the high potentials, or the high potentials from the high performers. I think that's a very important part, which means being able to identify those leadership traits which people who have the high potential are exhibiting. Sometimes you may find a person may be a square peg in a round hole, right? How do you identify that you've got an operational man into a strategy role where obviously he's not going to succeed? And it may be a great operations person, but you put him into a role where his weaknesses are going to be highlighted rather than his strengths. And you could also have a vice versa situation. The person who's got a great strategic mind is put into an operational role, and he's always worried about the day after tomorrow than about today. And obviously his performance does not show as well. So I think a good leader, I see this more as an opportunity for leaders to be able to spot those people. They should be able to spot them in terms of the contribution that they make, in terms of the kind of discussions that they have. And it is not just one person. Sometimes in a large forum, you are able to identify one person who, by a sheer question, has shown his brilliance of his perception, which you say, hey, this guy is different from the others, and I need to isolate him and see how it does. I take the analogy of cricket. India, as you know, is a cricket-mad country. And suddenly, of late, you have found in the last 10 years, there are so many brilliant cricketers who are coming up. How did that happen? That happened through the spotting system, which got created right from the grassroots level all the way up to the top level. Similarly, for an organization, it's important that we have people who are spotters, people who are trained spotters, people who are coached to be spotters, and these are managers. They are not someone who's very different. And they are trained to spot talent, to spot capability, to spot the potential. And they say, okay, this person we need to watch out for. So I think that importance has to be given, and it need not come only from one source. I know companies have got various ways of being able to identify such high potential. Some of them, of course, are through very well-known mechanisms of psychometric methods, as well as assessment centers and so on and so forth. But I think a good organization today looks at multiplicity of data points. Many conversations which people in leadership position and leadership roles have with various people. They even take external stakeholders' inputs and views. And I think you will find that more and more data point gets collected around people. And those data points then help us to spot that potential. It is not just one anecdotal system. It cannot be one episodical method. It has to be a consistent array of methodologies, both formal, structured, and informal, unstructured, together, which brings up a richness of the talent upwards. I think that's where I would say that the spotting high potential is much more difficult than spotting high performance. But both of them are critical to it.
Sure, sir. So it's very interesting when someone who is not in the sight at the limelight at the initial start of his career rises up to becoming the leader of the organization. So from your experience, would you be able to share any such examples with us so that we know that examples like that exist in real life, and we can also give those examples to our people so that they are motivated to continuing putting in their effort, whether it's showing today or not, maybe you have the potential for tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I think a good organization is one which allows for this to happen. I mean, there are many examples, but they will be such which most people would know about. So whether it's the Yogi Deveshwar coming from the ITC ecosystem to rise to the top, or so many from the Tata Group through the Tata Administrative Service have risen to the top to head many organizations. But I would talk of organizations and people at more junior level and mid levels through our experiences. So I gave you some names which are at the top of their profession. But I know of people who, let's say, joined as a management trainee or as a junior manager in a company and picked up a project which they found they were not particularly happy with the way it was being done at the organization. It could well be the way that, how forecasts are getting made in an organization, how sales forecasts are made or how business forecasts are made. Very often they're not. I mean, there is a lot of element of negotiation around it rather than very objective assessment. And how this young individual who was a party to that particular negotiation identified that there was a great opportunity here to bring more objectivity into the whole system of forecasting. And he went around, collected a huge amount of data, right, which was earlier on absent from the discussion. So when you don't have data and people talk of perceptions, it's very difficult to argue rationally and objectively. But the moment you bring in data to the discussion, the whole narrative of the and construct of the discussion changes. And he brought that in. He brought that in terms of the data, the past data, the regression analysis, the forecasting, and various other methods which he thought he could add value to the objectivity of that particular organization. With the result that organizations which are struggling to grow at around 10 to 15% suddenly saw 100% growth in a period of 3 years, because that person was able to help them identify which were the opportunities which were not being seen. So many such examples exist in organizations. And obviously when this person was doing it, you could understand that his supervisor, others around him, all felt that this was something special about this person, right? And there was no way that this person would not come out or evolve from that system. And I think a system which allows such freedom of thought, expression, and taking up disruptive ideas and bringing them up and bring some objectivity at times into the fray, such organizations will obviously be extremely benefited by high potential. I have a great respect for organizations like Unilever, which over the last 50, 70 years have consistently been able to create that talent. The whole ecosystem is geared towards creating that talent. And within that also, they are able to provide that capability. I think our armed forces are also a great example of how they are able to, in a fairly bureaucratic system, still able to identify people with high potential, so that you've always got great leadership strength at each level of the the army or the armed forces per se. So I think there's much to learn from these organizations and these institutions of how high potential can be spotted and how it can then be obviously nurtured and developed.
So you mentioned that there are various subjective and objective ways to assess an individual to identify whether he's a high performer or high potential person. But so what are the parameters? It's a VUCADD world out here, and it's a digitally disruptive, constantly evolving world. In the current scenario, what is relevant for a leadership role today might not be relevant for the leadership role that you are foreseeing right now for tomorrow. So in this kind of a situation, what are the characteristics that we should look out for? Also, if we try to map it to the different kind of myriad of organizations that exist, right from traditional organizations to very contemporary organizations, app-based organizations, how do you see that how should we be able to map the capabilities of these people to identify those high potentials?
I think that's a $1 million question, and I think it's changing so rapidly now that organizations are still, I think, somewhat struggling with this idea. So we are saying that the world is changing around us and changing at a pace which is very rapid. Not that change was not there earlier, it's just a pace which is really putting a lot of stress in the system. Now, if I look at it, organizations which have been able to try and beat this and be a step ahead, both individuals as well as organizations. If I am not able to learn fast enough today, I will get off the expressway of growth and development very clearly. So my ability to learn, my agility to learn has to be extremely fast. And for which it means that I should not be carrying any baggage, carrying any paradigms. I should be very open. And I should be open to change. So which brings me to the other part of it. I should be very open to change. I should be able to learn and unlearn very rapidly and not get fixated by any old paradigms or old ideas. So learning agility as well as my ability to change and drive change, not wait for change to happen to me, but for me to be able to drive the change becomes very important. I think the third part, which is, I think every organization today recognizes, is my speed of action. From speed of thought or speed of learning to speed of action, I think that the third agility is extremely, extremely important. I would say these three capabilities of how quickly I learn and assimilate things, my openness to ideas and change, and thirdly, my ability and the speed with which I can act. In addition, you have factors of collaboration. Clearly, that's very important because I'm going to be like a loose radical which can go and attached to everyone. If I have that ability, I'll be doing great because I can be a part of a team, a B team, or a C team. But if I'm fixated with only one kind of working, then I will be limiting my potential. So as a leader for today, I need to be moving like a free radical, get attached here, get attached here, get attached here, and quickly move on, accomplish my task, do what I have to do, and move on. So that makes me a more complete leader for today's world and tomorrow's world. So 4 points which I mentioned: learning ability, agility of action, the aspect of openness to change, and being able to collaborate. And when I say collaborate, it means at various levels, various locations. I should be able to attach myself to that, give off my best and move on. So these, if I can help identify people who thrive in such environments or show such strong behaviors, they are my choice for the leaders and engines for tomorrow for my organization.
So when we talk about these 4 qualities, it basically falls back into showing that it is the person, it's the onus is on the person, it's the self that we need to develop. It's the self-awareness that we should have about our shortcomings, about our strengths, and our ability to quickly overcome the shortcomings to put us back on the expressway to leadership. So my next question is, while we identify these abilities, these shortcomings, our development areas, Do we also need to identify the kind of organizational need that is currently there? For example, any development journey should be a combination, should address both the organizational aspirations and the individual's aspirations. So if an organization is different in its value system, should a person's strategy of an aspiring leader towards moving up the ladder should be different vis-a-vis a different organization, and how that difference should be applicable, or an aspiring leader should implement that in his everyday working so that he still flourishes as a leader.
So I think I'll just expand on that thought of the learning ability. I think so far the focus of organizations has been let's provide training, let's provide development opportunities, and let us make a person do things, right? I think we will have to move away from that because there's so much of a wastage in that. I think the first thing is, if the person is not keen on learning, then he is not your leader for tomorrow. I think we have to be very clear about that. So I say this as much to organizations as I say to the individuals. If you are not going to learn, if you are not focused on your own development, then who else would be interested? And if you are not going to be developing, then very quickly you will fall off the growth expressway. So if you want to be on the growth expressway, because the world is moving at an express speed, you need to be able to learn and unlearn very quickly, whether they are functional skills, whether they are leadership skills, whether it's ability to attune yourself with the environment. All these are things which you must be very much in sync with your ecosystem, whatever be that organization. If you are not, then the chances for your growth will get limited. As an organization, is equally true for an organization. If as an organization I'm not changing, then in a competitive environment, I will be very quickly as an organization become a has-been, right? So I will not be there tomorrow, it will not be. So that's why I think McKinsey, when they say that more than 25% of the organization may not exist in the next 10, 15 years, they are coming from that organizations and individuals be off the expressway. Now, if you have a leader who's leading an organization and he's following the same methods which were there 5 years, 10 years ago, the same way of looking at the future, do you think that organization is going to survive on that expressway? No, I don't think so. Same is true for an individual. So if as an individual, I feel myself that I'm very much comfortable in an organization which is moving it at a slow speed, and I think I can grow there, I would like to disabuse them of this idea. Because maybe you're sitting on an organization or a part of an organization which is not going to take you very far. Right? So if it is not going to take you very far, you may feel very comfortable there, right? But that comfort may not last too long. So focus on your own growth. Be a part of a system which is moving fast, which is moving at agility, and you try to match that agility. Because the ecosystem is very agile. Ecosystem is changing rapidly, right? If today we talk of the fact that the auto industry has the growth rate has gone down and there's a decline in that. At the same time, there are vehicles like Ola and Uber, which are probably growing, right? So there is a different method perhaps happening there. You have the e-commerce, which is taking away a lot of traffic from the footfalls in malls and other places. People may be coming there, but not for purchases. So if we don't change our business model in line with what the ecosystem is, then those businesses are not going to survive. If the businesses are not going to survive, will the leaders be able to survive in those businesses? If they are able to survive, which means that they have become more agile and they're learning, they will change the system and the business model of that organization. And those are the leaders which will emerge, and those are the leaders which will, the businesses which will be able to survive. So coming back to your question in terms of, that the individuals who are going to be part of an organization which is slow moving or more mature, would they be better off there, or would they be better off in a system which is moving fast? To my mind, I think the answer is a moot question, because in both cases, you will not survive if you don't go fast enough. Right? Have I answered your question, Parinita?
Yes, sir. So I think the organizational value system also has a key role to play there. or maybe in an organization who has a traditional mindset, but far-sighted. For them, maybe a certain set of qualities might be essential. For another set of organization who has a modern mindset and has a completely different set of capability requirement for their organizational functioning, their requirement would be different. The capabilities required for leadership would be different. And I think the trick is to map the capabilities that the organizational stems from organizational vision and the capabilities that are required for each role. I think that mapping has to be done. And the people who are working in the organization and who are aspiring leaders should be able to focus in that direction where there's a merger of the organizational values and the individual's aspirations.
True, absolutely. So I am not for a moment suggesting that the values of the organization are unimportant. They are, right? But the values also, the way they manifest themselves today could change. So there are old established organizations which continue to be deep rooted in tradition, but does not make it that they are not agile. I think they know that their businesses that they have to be in need to be agile. So if I, as an organization which has strong values, very traditional, get into technology business, and technology moves at a certain speed. Now, leadership there has to be of that capability, having those capabilities which will allow it to move. So in today's digital world, for example, there are so many possibilities which it throws up for leaders. If I am not aware of those possibilities, how will I harness them? I don't have to be an expert in them, but I need to be aware of them. I need to be aware of them and surround myself with advice, with capabilities, which can guide me and suggest to me what is it that can help an organization move at a quadruple speed, right? But if I am not caught up in my values of antiquity and I'm unwilling to change from there, then the world is not going to care for my values, right? The way I see it, my values are to grow. My values also are to be traditional, but tradition does not mean that I don't have to grow. So I need to be able to match that. That's why I said that the learning agility will not come through if I would caught up with my yesterday, right? I'm not saying leave that, but have a continuum from there. That's, I think, a very important thing. We can sometimes feel good about the fact that we are very deep rooted in our values, etc. But if they debar us from moving forward, then it's time for us to say, okay, how do I manifest those values in a way that they actually allow me and the organization to grow? Right? So, and I think that's what you're finding a lot of things happening. So today, when a lot of management concepts, leadership concepts are actually being rooted from the old thoughts. So it's not that there are two very divergent worlds we are talking.
Sure, sir. So, as far as we discuss now, you have highlighted the importance of both the high potentials and the high performers. The keen focused identification of the people who can drive organizational success. They could be the high performers, they could be the high potentials. What needs to be taken care of is the manager's hawk-eyed foresight as to the kind of people that they need to select or the kind of organizational aspirations people have in the organization's objective, and then select the people, have key measures in place to identify those potentials. We also spoke about how various organizations are moving forward towards developing these high potentials and how different kinds of methodologies, be it very objective methodologies of assessment, psychometrics, behavioral interviews and job shadowing kind of methodologies that we are using, or we use informal processes of, subjective inputs from supervisors, subordinates, from customers, from other stakeholders. So there's a gamut of data that we collect to finally present a report of the kind of potential that the person has and who are the people that we should focus on as an organization. So our next section, we would be focusing on, now that we have the data with us and there's a synthesis of this data and we understand that there are certain strengths of our people and there are certain development areas. The strength areas are something that everybody likes to talk about. It's easy to share as a manager. It's easy to accept as a subordinate. But what about the development areas? It's very difficult to have that conversation with your subordinates about the development areas. And also there is a bigger challenge when the defenses go up when the development areas are shown to you. In order that a development process is smooth and the development process is successful, I think that buy-in needs to be there from the people towards their development areas, and only then the development goals can be set. So how do we do that, sir?
I think that's again, a sensitive area with individuals and with organizations. So especially when let's take the high performers separately and the high potential for a moment later. So if you look at high performers, they are the ones who are really making the company's performance stand out today. And they are worth their weight in gold. Now, if you tell them that you're not a high potential, what do you think is going to be the impact on that person and his productivity? So it's a sensitive discussion to have. And the focus is not to say you're not a high potential. The focus is to say that, okay, how can you continue to be a high performer? Right? I can be a high performer in same or similar roles rather than taking in a big, huge leap of faith into another role and finding that I am not so good at that. And that's what I think derails me, demotivates me. I don't need my boss's good advice because I can see the performance or lack of it myself. But so if as a high performer, as a leader, my first responsibility is to ensure that that this person continues to give a high degree of performance. And what is it that I can help him with or her with to do so? So the development plan is largely built around that. Now you can imagine, Parinita, that today a large part of middle management of most organizations have people who were high performers, and I use the word were high performers, not today. And today they're becoming a bit of a bottleneck in the whole system. Why? Because I don't think they were handled adequately or appropriately to ensure that their high performance was continued for a much longer period. So they felt that they were high performers who were now being seen by their management as not having any potential to grow. Not enough conversations took place. So there was a certain bit of resentment, a sulking kind of an approach which comes into play. So more than an enabler, they become disablers in the system. And that becomes a big bottleneck in the whole process, the delivery process of an organization. To manage that, I think it's very important to ensure that those people have a clear line of sight to their development, for them to continue to be high performers. And that is where their growth lies. Their growth lies in continuing to perform exceedingly well at what they are good at. Right? For them to ensure that whatever their gaps are or the areas which they are not so good at are helped so that their performance can become better and better. Something can be holding it back. That's for the high performers. And it's, as I said, your first question was, should we focus on the high performers or the high potential? And I said both are critical. And you can understand that if your mid-management is going to become sick, right, the whole organization cannot be but sick. And to avoid that sickness, you have to focus on their development of the high potential. When we come to the high performers, now when we come to the high potential, now that's where really they are your engines for the future. From the growth of 10, 15% or whatever you are currently doing, if your aspiration is that you need to be in the 30, 40, 50% bracket and more, then that's going to happen if you are going to do things differently or if you're going to do different things, right? And that is going to be coming through people who are going to question the status quo, who have that great ability to learn and learn very fast, who are learning for themselves. Their whole passion is about the learning of what's happening in the world, and they see so many opportunities which others may not. And they are the ones who need to be harnessed. Now, to be able to ensure that we have set them a clear line of sight, guide them, coach them, mentor them, provide them the inputs, because their learning agility is such, they don't need you to say, okay, now, you will be going to this program or that program. They themselves will come out to you and say, okay, I need to focus on this development. I need something here. So they will be yearning for learning, as it were. And to provide them the right coach and the right counsel within the system can be the best way to help them. So if you can provide a mentor to all your high potential, I think it's a great way to learn. I think there is no one who's grown without a good mentor. Knowingly or unknowingly, there is always a good person who is supporting them. And I think it's important to identify for those people who their mentor is and set some very clear goals. Because sometimes these people can also go a little astray in their yearning for learning, as I put it. Sometimes the learning itself can become a goal in itself. No, it isn't. It is a path to a goal. So how you are able to manage them, how you are able to help them navigate, I think it's very important. So set very clear goals, and clear goals both for the very long term, because otherwise you may find disgruntlement, dissatisfaction, and you lose a huge capital. When someone, one of your high potential, leaves you, leaves any company, there's a huge loss. Huge loss. We know when we lose customers, but when we lose a high potential employee, perhaps the loss is even bigger, right? Especially in a leadership role. So we need to be very clear that when we are working with someone in a high potential, we are providing enough growth as well as real links around to ensure that they don't go away and their development is in line with the development goals of the organization. So the alignment has to be constant. There has to be a strong mentorship, and there's a huge amount of freedom to work. Because and if you can identify the right people, I don't think we would, as people, developers, have a real challenge. Our real challenge is to provide them the freedom to learn, guide them, provide them the rail guards, etc., so they don't go off the track. And that, I think, is what will work extremely well. I have not come across any leader who went through a very, very structured program to come up as a great leader. They became a great leader because their learning needs were so high, and they went out and got that learning. And today's world where learning is so easy and so simple, you don't need to worry about their learning. Right? You need to spot the right person, create the right ecosystem for that person, and guide them.
Sure, sir. So basically, it is about providing a psychologically safe environment for people to make mistakes, learn, identify their own development areas, focus on learning, learn with agility, and collaborate with your mentors to understand what your future, what you want from your future, and how the mentor can guide you through it. So, sir,
I would make a little change here, Parin.
Sure, sir.
Because when we are talking of people with high potential and a good leadership capability, then one shoe does not fit all. Right? So you would have to come out with, and that's why when I focused on the fact that a lot of data for each person is to be collected. Now, when you have a different kind of data for each person, as HR professionals, we tend to follow a common method. Okay, so all these people have to be developed, let's put them in that path. I think that is where sometimes we make this mistake of one shoe fit all for our ease of management rather than their ease of learning and their ease of development. So these people, as I said, are to be nurtured like you would nurture a great key account, a great customer, or a great vendor. You really nurture them because you know that the dependence of the organization on this system is very high. Treat critical employees like that, which means you will create a system of their learning which is unique to that person. Obviously, you can't do this for hundreds of people. But when you're talking of people with high potential, high performance, you need to treat them with all the data that you have, create a very curated kind of a journey for them, a development path. So that, I think, comes sometimes in the way of us HR professionals, that we would like to manage things and hence tend to make something which are common.
So when we use these methodologies to assess our people, you say that they are straight-jacketed method and we need to curate paths for leadership development. But in those curated paths, are there any standardized process that we can follow? Because at the end of the day, we need data which is reliable and valid so that we are able to judge people on really objective grounds. And also, how do we then benchmark our leadership capital against global standards, globally benchmark standards, so that we know that our talent is as far as that, and hence we need to invest on them?
Absolutely. So I think as we are talking of commercial organizations, and commercial organizations have one very clear goal, is profitable growth. And so one very clear measure for this is our business performances, right? Both in the immediate term as well as in the longer term. So that cannot be. So potential is no substitute for performance. Potential with performance is what we want to look at. So we must be very clear on the business performance parameters And they need not be only financial parameters, and typically they are not. They cover a very wide array of performance outputs, including from the employees, covering all the stakeholders, the vendors, the shareholders, the ecosystem, the larger public base, and so on at the leadership level. So I think you have a very wide variety of performance measures available today, and you pick up those which are relevant. And at each level, you will have to develop those performance measures. I think you also have to see what are the in-process measures which you need to put in place. So I said, like, what are the guiding rails you can put? And those guiding rails help us to ensure that the person is not focused on something which is maybe his interest, which is not wrong, but it may not be company's interest at all, or unlikely to be. So you need to be able to steer that. Otherwise, valuable company time and resources are going into areas which are not relevant to you. But I think accountability of performance is always there. And learning is a way, is not the end, is a means to achieving that performance. So I don't think one should compromise on that at all.
Sure, sir. So, however, I would want to know that how do you benchmark these people? We have the learning paths in place. We have curated measures for these people. But do we know that these people are the people whom we want to develop? Because there's a huge investment cost for an organization involved when you focus on each people. When the pipeline gets narrower at the top, when the investment on each leader becomes geometrical numbers. So in that case, how do we know that these people stand, tall in our globally benchmark standards?
So I think it's when you do the potential assessment, you don't do it once in a lifetime. Mm-hmm. You keep on consistently measuring it. So that's what I said, that when you are on the growth expressway, at each turn of your growth, you would be measured. You should be assessed. And you should be, when I say measured or assessed, I'm saying of getting the same kind of input as you got in the first case. So after 3 years or 2 years, you would reassess and say, is the person still having the same potential for growth as what he exhibited? And if he does, the next 3 years and the next 3 years. So you can't make a 20-year plan. You have to make for each high potential, maybe a 2 to 3 year plan. And then be able to say that, okay, how do we keep on rejuvenating it, reassessing it, and make the necessary corrections? Because there are so many things which can happen around a person. There are so many factors which can happen in personal life, which sometimes can impact a person's performance. So while being sensitive to it, you also need to be able to understand and assess the impact on that performance. So potential assessment is an ongoing effort. It's not a one-time effort. So you would make that at least every 3 years, if not earlier. And at every turn, whenever you're giving a new responsibility or you think a person is to be given additional responsibility, you would make that potential assessment. So you would keep on getting the inputs on that person on a regular basis, but you make that assessment of consolidating everything and putting the rigor and the robust process behind it to ensure that when we're now assessing this person 3 years from where he was, where does he stand today? Is he still my high potential? Then again 3 years, then again, right? I think we can't assume that once a high potential, always a high potential.
True, sir. So we have a few questions from our audience. I would like to take a couple of them now. One of our audience asks that the development of leadership development process is a lifelong journey. There are development programs for the mid-level, the junior level, and for the senior level. How do you think they should be different? What should be the parameters of measurement at each level? Should they be same? Should they be different? We have already understood the bigger parameters of measurement in the VUCADD world, but coming to the grassroots level, what should be the differences while developing leaders at the various levels?
I think the challenges are very, very different. So if you were to look at the junior management and the middle management, the requirements of the roles become very, very different. I mean, the number of people you're looking at junior management to middle management to senior management is like your funnel. It's in reverse, or the pyramid, as it were. The challenges are very different, so hence the business goals become very different. The development goals have to come from the business goals. The business goals are a lot more clearer at the base of the pyramid, reasonably clear at the middle management, and totally unclear at the top management. And that's the way it should be, because you're dealing with ambiguity, right? So the kind of challenges I'm going to face are based on the role that I'm performing. So if the role that I'm performing will also tell me what is the kind of learning I need to have, what are the capabilities I need to have, and hence my learning goals. So they'll be much clearer and sharper at the junior management. They should be. They should be a little more open to diffusion and lack of clarity at the second level, middle management. And they should be largely be unclear at the senior management, because you want the senior management to think for themselves and say, not that this is what I want to achieve as organization has told me, but this is what the organization can achieve. And this is my vision of for the organization. So there's a lot more freedom as you go up the ladder. So the learning must provide for that. The learning goals must provide for that. And I think obviously then the development path will be different.
Sure. So there's another question where this person asks us that he has an employee, and during the appraisal time, during the performance appraisal time, this employee has come up with certain learning needs from his end, which does not match the organizational's givings. And he says that he would want to pursue these objectives in mind, and we as an organization are not being able to provide for it. He's a high performer, and we see great potential in him. How do I handle this situation?
Again, as I said, is it at the senior level? At the senior level, I would say without any hesitation, give him the freedom to choose, right? If he's at the junior management level, guide him towards because what he's going to be doing, maybe he's taking towards his personal professional goals, which we need to be able to understand, and then help see how we can synergize the two. Right? At the senior level, I would have no hesitation. Give him his due, whatever he wants to do, right? He is mature enough, he's been in the system, you are entrusting him so much of the organization. To give him a certain freedom to do what he wants to do can only benefit the organization. I have no doubt about that. And I know many organizations which actually have proven this very successfully. At the junior management level, I think you need to be a little more circumspect. One should be able to guide the person, understand his needs, where are those needs coming from, right? And help that person if the needs are genuine and you believe that this person is going to a path which could help the organization. I always go along with it, because I think the organization goals are so big at that level as compared to an individual at the junior management that they should be able to provide for that freedom. But if it does not, then I think you need to be able to have a conversation with the person and try and realign. It's a process of alignment which keeps on happening all the time. Especially it happens when we're looking at functional skills, not so much at leadership skills. At the junior level, people want to learn new functional skills because they believe that will help them in their growth path. So then focus on their growth path and then help them to understand why those functional capabilities may or may not be best suited for their growth plan.
Sure. Thank you, sir. We're almost closing into time, and I would like to thank you for your valuable insights. I think the key focus should be on self. I think the onus is on ourselves as people who are aspiring to be leaders for tomorrow. We should look into our own development and come with an open mind of learning, of being agile towards learning, towards collaborating with others, towards collaborating with and also not like-minded people, and accept the mentoring of our seniors and go ahead on our development path. I would like to close today's session with Kennedy's words, where he says that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So as we grow, we learn, and as we learn, we grow. So on that note, thank you all of you who have been attending this webinar. As learning and development professionals, I think it is our responsibility to facilitate the process of setting the right development goals and the right learning path to achieve those goals. We would also invite you to join our next webinar on this series on creating individual development plans. We shall soon share the details with you. For some of the questions which we could not take during the webinar due to paucity of time, we would get back to you over email. Thank you so much.